Very exciting. Embedded finance is changing global money movement. And we've got Jenny Miller from Wise, we've got Mohit Kansal from Flywire, Kristen Kynes from Evolve Bank and Trust, and moderator for today is David Beam from Mayer Brown. Give it up.
Welcome, everyone. As you just said, this is the topic of this presentation is, are we moving towards a world, or embedded finance is changing global money movement? And we have a great set of panelists today. My name is David Beam. I'm a partner at Mayer Brown in Washington, D.C. I'm a lawyer who does a lot of work in embedded finance space. But we actually have a panelist here of non-lawyers who are going to talk about what's really interesting, which is how embedded finance actually is working and operating and what its future is. So I'll first actually just ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves, talk about their company and what their role is in the embedded finance sphere.
Certainly, I'll go first. I am Kristen Kynes. I'm the Vice President Business Development Officer for Evolve's Open Banking Division. Evolve is a leader in the open banking space as far as working with different fintech companies and embedded finance. So we've been in the industry now for about 5 years. Very excited to be here.
Hi, I'm Jenny. I'm with Wise. We're a global payments and technology company. We are building what we feel is the best way to move money internationally. Wise was started about 10 years ago. We've been in the US for about 7 years, and in that time, we have a number of different types of customers, both consumers, businesses who use the platform to send money internationally. We have an ability for customers to hold up to send in 50 different currencies, to hold in local details in 9 currencies. And we're here today to talk about how we embed in each of those different life experiences.
Good afternoon, everybody. Mohit Kansal, representing Flywire here. Flywire believes software drives value in payments. So what we do is we solve complex payment challenges for clients in specific industries. So call it travel, education, healthcare, B2B type verticals. We create software and combine that with payments to create what we'd like to believe are magical experiences. I've been with the company 7 years, and my team is responsible for setting up the payments network, creating these experiences for clients, and also value-added services and products for our clients as customers. Excited for the conversation.
Okay. Excellent. Let's start, and this might seem unnecessary to define embedded finance, because I'm sure every person in this audience could define embedded finance comprehensively, but I bet you each one of their definitions would be a little bit different, because the term is used in a lot of different ways to refer to a lot of different things, and I think everybody has a slightly different concept of what is embedded finance when you hear that term. So the first question I'd like to pose to the panelists is just, how do you define embedded finance? What do you view it as? And how do you see it fitting into, what do you see it as its primary use case?
So I could take that first. You know, relative to the bank's stance here, I think we have a different vantage than both Wise and Flywire, just because, you know, behind the scenes, we ultimately are the banking institution. The way Evolve views it and the way Evolve kind of looks at the industry, we approach the market in 2 different stances. So we've got our direct partnerships, and then we have more of what we call these third-party aggregators. Behind the scenes, we've actually built out a technology layer that's really kind of broken down between 3 different stacks of APIs. So we're an acquiring bank, an issuing bank, and then we've got a retail banking stack of APIs as well. So in our minds, we provide a lot of the underlying technology, a lot of the payment rails, sponsorships with the card networks, those sorts of things, to help power companies like Wise and Flywire and help them launch their products and initiatives to the market.
I'll speak about it from a consumer and a customer standpoint, actually. We can talk about the different platforms and the payment rails a little bit as well. But really from a customer standpoint, I think embedded finance can mean a couple of different things. Wise obviously provides an ability for customers to send money internationally, to hold in different currencies, but we're doing so in a way that allows access to those things and embeds in their lifestyle in a way that's maybe different to what they would have had previously without access to those international components. We find that customers, when you move, when you relocate, when you're traveling abroad, often getting that domestic-like experience, access to instant rails, access to cheap and transparent finances is done well domestically, but we're trying to bridge that gap for those customers who also take a leap across the border. And so embedded can be the platform itself, the rails that different companies maybe work with or partnerships. But from a customer standpoint, I think that's important to acknowledge as well.
For me, at a broader level, when software that is non-financial comes together with financial services, usually those are adjacent to the core offering of the software, I think of that as embedded finance. Now, it could be two different companies doing the software piece and the financial services piece. It could be the same company doing it. It could be different depths to which the stack is formed. But in my mind, it's when core software offering coming together with financial services and products. How that applies to Flywire is we've always been a payments company. That's how we started off, but we are solving for specific industries. So for us, the finance part of embedded finance has traditionally been payments. We are venturing into doing new and slightly different things, but it's always been the payments piece. We also owned a fair amount of the software as it relates to payments, and then integrated into these software offerings across industries. So that's how embedded finance applies to Flywire.
Jenny, how is embedded finance changing global money movement? And in particular, what are some factors that you should consider when relying on embedded finance for cross-border constructs?
Yeah, and specifically from our perspective, the differences between different markets. So if you're trying to look at launching a payments product in one country for one set of customers, it's that in itself is a tall order. To do that well, to understand the customer need, and to offer something that is compliant with the regulatory framework, matches a customer expectation, meets the market needs just once is quite complicated. I think where Wise takes a look at that is how can we expand that and replicate that process from market to market and embed ourselves in the different local landscapes as well as we can. And so getting those sort of direct relationships with the customer and being able to have access to those rails for individual customers is, I think, an important element of getting the cross-border element right. And again, that's bringing it back to being able to have as close to that real-time experience for customers.
And Mohit, what's your perspective on how embedded finance is changing global money movement?
Yeah, so money movement, obviously, cross-border money movement has been happening for a while, and it's been full of challenges. There's the challenge of moving the money itself, which is hard, right? Because you're moving money cross-border, more regulations, and all of those things. Then there's the data element. What kind of data do you need to flow with the money that's flowing? And the third one is, what are the specific constructs that are related to the industry that the money's, so call it the purpose of money movement, right? It used to be where some entities were only responsible for the money movement piece. Somebody else was responsible for other parts of it. And many times, the problem wasn't necessarily the money movement, but it's all these ancillary things. So if I can use an example of, say, education vertical that we work in. And we started off a long time ago to help educational institutions receive money from all around the world. And the interesting part of that was when you work with educational institutions, they get students from all around the world, every single country. So we were forced to solve, called this cross-border problem across industry, across many different countries, currencies, all of that, but for one sector. When you're moving money out of a country, each country would have regulations around what kind of paperwork needs to be filled. In some cases, it would be electronic. In some cases, it's not electronic. There's elements of data that need to be captured with the payment because there may be an audit later on to figure out why this money was moved. On the receiving side, usually, at least in the world we were in, all students were paying money one day before the deadline. Surprise, surprise. And what that did was, it was impossible for the educational institution to reconcile all these payments, right? Imagine one payment is half of the tuition is being paid by your mom, half is being paid by a grandfather or somebody who wants to pay for all of that. And that is the part we set out to solve, right? We rely on partners such as banks and others to move the money or other payment partners, but then we build the software. So by the way in our world embedded finance is changing cross-border money movement is combining all of these things, the data elements, the reconciliation elements, the software elements with the money movement to create a seamless experience for our clients, which in this case would be, say, NYU, since we're in New York, and the student or the parent themselves who are paying from China or India or somewhere else. So in our world, it is changing it significantly by servicing not just our clients, but their customers as well.
And Kristen, so banks, global expansion is particularly a challenge for banks. How does Evolve view global expansion?
So I think this is an interesting topic. You know, I really feel like Evolve has been one of the leaders in the space as far as looking at some of these innovative use cases and really kind of taking this as an opportunity to get ahead of the curve here. What I would say about it is the technology part's probably the easiest part. You know, relative to the bank's stance on this, we need to really kind of peel back the layers and understand from a BSA AML stance, you know, what are the different components of the program? How is this going to come together? From a compliance and legal perspective, you know, the bank really is going to take a hard look at, you know, do we have all the correct documentation down? What are the things that we need to consider, you know, as far as exploring an opportunity like this? So you know, I would stress the components of when we're looking at these different edge use cases like this, we'll do it on a case-by-case basis, but yeah.
So when you're encountering all these challenges, what are the benefits of embedded finance that make it all worthwhile to go through all these challenges?
You know, I think scalability, you know, for the different companies, you've got all these different supply chain, different verticals and use cases and stuff where, you know, profitability, scalability, you can leverage the technology here to, you know, increase revenues in certain scenarios there. I think that there's a ton that you can.
Yeah, and Jenny, what do you see as the key benefits?
Yeah, I think aside from an individual, like the sort of different scenarios that a company can move into or the services that you might provide, I'll do this a lot, bring this back to why it matters for customers. If you look at the needs that, especially when it comes to cross-border payments, folks will have a domestic life often in 2 different scenarios, sometimes more, it depends on your specific situation. But let's take the example of someone who's relocated. They've moved from, you know, one country to the next. They're going to have a nexus to that home country always. And then their new location, say they've moved here, right? You're getting access to the US banking system, getting access to products here is something that is part of their goals when they're relocating. And the embedded nature that Wise brings to that is that conduit, that on and off ramp of helping them sort of bridge that gap, live both of those lifestyles very seamlessly. So what we really look at is the need at its core is I have a remittance need, or I need to get money from point A to point B. And we want to make sure that customers can do that in both aspects. My sort of domestic life, I have access to those things from whichever country I'm from to wherever I live today, that Wise makes the facilitation of funds flow very easy, very transparent. We do over 50% of those transactions happen instantly today. And so that feel for a customer, that it's all one experience and that those things live together is that's a very nice end customer outcome, but as we've all talked about, the layers behind that, the work that we have to do to make sure that our product is tapping into the right networks, is compliant, as you've mentioned, all of those elements have to come together very nicely to make that experience seem simple for customers.
And Mohit, you talked about the benefits for the education, the education sector, from embedded finance. What are some other industries that really stand to benefit from embedded finance and when it comes to payments? Yeah,
in Flywire's world, education is obviously one of them. I can use an example of a travel use case. So we operate in the high-end luxury travel sector where our clients are the tour operators, destination management companies, and others who are offering these customized luxury trips to their clients. If you think of any destination management company or a tour operator, usually what they're doing is they're creating these custom trips for you as a traveler, and they're stitching together, call it, products and services from 6 to 8 different other operators behind the scenes. right? So you want to go to Iceland, you want to do 10 different things. There's 4 other providers behind the scenes who do that. So in this case, the DMC or the tour operator, what they would do is, the first and foremost, they have to collect the payment from you, the traveler, right? This payment has to be the sum of all the payments that they're making to their suppliers, probably in a different currency that is of the traveler, right? I assume most people going to Iceland who are getting tours are not Icelandic folks. They're probably from other parts of the world. Managing all the FX. Once the money, first of all, the experience has to be seamless, the cross-border experience, money has to come in, it has to be stitched together. Once the money comes in, they have to have the right data to figure out when to pay each supplier, what are the terms of those payments, both in terms of the amount, the commission rates, and the timing, and a bunch of other currency, of course. And what do you do in case a trip gets changed? Somebody changes their 3-day trip to a 4-day trip. Somebody gets an additional few hotel nights or adds packages to the tour when they arrive. Building all that complexity with software and solving it through, in our case, payments, is of extreme importance. So that's a big travel use case. Now, all of these travel companies, they didn't start the business to do payments, right? A lot of B2B companies or others may know about payments, but that's not their core business, right? They're trying to create the absolute best trip, and the last thing they want to figure out is, if I have to pay the supplier in 45 days and these are the terms in a different currency, how do I hedge the FX? How much commission do I charge them? How do I validate the invoice? And those are the kind of problems that you can solve in travel, and we at Flywire are in the middle of. And those are interesting challenges, right? All the entities in this transaction have all the information available to them to make all of this happen. It's just not that travel company that wants to fix that problem. And that's where we come in, and it's a really cool application of embedded finance in the travel industry.
And that gets into the buy versus build question a lot of times with technology. And you're alluding to that embedded finance can play a big role in that decision. Jenny, do you want to talk a little bit about that and how, generally the buy versus build decision, how it factors into embedded finance?
Yeah, I think you've kind of pointed it out well. I think the decision comes down to, at least the way that I would encourage you to think about it is what is the thing that you do very well, right? If you're a small business owner, right, a travel company, or if, in our case, we work with a lot of other fintech players, maybe in the workforce management space, or that provide consumer finance or banking-like products, right? They probably have a customer segment, a skill set, a particular service or offering that's very well suited to a particular customer need, and that team who's creating that experience is knowledgeable and skilled in that space. I think it's always a stretch to jump into a different line of business. Knowing FX markets, knowing how to settle those transactions is difficult to do, and it's difficult to do well. And so I think the way that Wise comes into those situations is, what can we uniquely offer and accelerate of the growth for that customer segment, for a partner of ours. To give an example, if there's a cross section of a domestic bank and their clientele that have an international need, it's a big stretch to jump internationally, so let Wise provide that for you, right? That embedded nature. We are running the international rails for a number of different organizations, and we do that through really strong partnerships and understanding those customer needs, making sure that we're solving for the use cases that both the business in the middle has and that end customer, so a client of ours using our platform and their end customer need. Again, it's getting really, really close to what are the expectations, how do we fit within that experience. Oftentimes, Wise can be directly embedded into a solution that's offered to an end customer. And I think those are the examples where, choosing to partner in that case, to work with a company that's, an expert in the space that has the network that we do, is a choice that can really facilitate and move that volume for you faster.
And Kristen, how do you see it, the buy versus build decision, and how embedded finance fits into it?
So coming from the banking perspective, we look at this slightly differently. So, companies like Wise and Flywire will look at it from the end user perspective, and the types of platforms that they end up working with. From our perspective, we partner directly with the fintech companies. So Wise, for example, is has been a great partner of the bank for the last several years. I think, 4 years now, I think we've had a partnership. When when specific fintech companies are looking at certain technologies and wanting to launch the next product or the next offering, a lot of times they'll come to us and say, hey, look, we want to work with the bank directly. There's in taking a look at some of these different variables, what stage company are they? Does it make sense to leverage a different BaaS provider that can help provide a lot of the compliance tools, a lot of the technology that will help them get launched and help them really ultimately scale the business in a more efficient way. So in that capacity, does it make sense to partner with some of these third-party aggregator type relationships versus a direct relationship with a bank?
Interesting question came in from the audience. It relates to the increased regulatory scrutiny. We've seen a lot more of that. Regulators are much more interested. How is that affecting embedded finance, in particular business planning for embedded finance, having this specter of regulatory scrutiny and a lot of the uncertainty about how they're viewing it?
I think it's an important topic to touch on. I think it's something that I think everybody needs to be aware of. It's a good opportunity for banks and for platforms alike and everybody that's kind of operating in this space to make sure, as you're marching ahead and looking to launch new products, new services, to really make sure that you have everything buttoned up from a compliance and regulatory stance, and make sure that you're truly staying on top of the regulatory standard from that capacity. So I do think it's a good opportunity to kind of dig in and take care of what you got.
And
Can I take an answer to that one? Yeah, so just another thought on that too. I think with additional scrutiny, it's often interpreted as hard to deal with or something that is just a thing to be managed, a task that folks tend to move through really quickly. What I would love to see is that providers in the space, companies like ours, start to think about the reason why at the end of the day it matters. So we talk about these things in sort of abstract contracts. There's a list of documents we must collect from customers, or there's due diligence processes that we've got to follow. Great, but they're there for a reason, and I think it's important to understand the reason why, and at the end of the day, it's to protect the end customer. And so I think with additional regulatory scrutiny, if we all sort of remember that it's there for a good reason, it makes that process easier to understand. And also, I think it should start to empower companies like ours to make better decisions about what are the elements that we're embedding, to use that word, into the process to satisfy those requirements, but to do so in a way that is both accomplishing the goal, right? Protect the customer, protect the business in some way, as well as fulfill that need.
Maybe I can share a little bit on this one as well. Regulation, as long as it's thoughtful and well-defined, it's a good thing, right? At the end of the day, if you know the rules of the sport, you know how to win, right? As long as they're the same for everybody and they're well-defined and they're fair. We happen to be in a business where, because we started with education and most of the international students come from China and India, we've been dealing with regulations with one would argue, probably the hardest markets in the world, right? What we've seen is, to what Jenny said, it's not a bad thing. Just because they heavily scrutinize you or have all these regulations, it's not a bad thing. As long as, again, they're clear and you know what you're against, and you just adapt to it, right? I think the problem happens when the rules are not clear and there's the gray, and then eventually they come in and say, oh, this is not gray, this is actually red. And then companies who were operating in the gray, thinking that it's okay, they get into trouble. So I welcome regulation. Again, it should not be a knee-jerk reaction to something. It should be very thoughtful. And you'll see so many fintech companies and others actually saying there should be more regulation, but tell us the rules. Don't just not make any rules and let us figure them out. Just make them clear. Make sure you have the right people in the room to define them. And usually, I think you end up, in my mind, at least in a better spot than you would be without them.
Absolutely, and I also think it's very important as a bank to have a good relationship with your regulators. So this is something that we're constantly doing, in constant conversations with these guys, saying, hey, look, these are some of the edge use cases that we're looking at moving forward. Is this something you guys can get on board with? Is this something that you think is, digestible? So I think communication there, education there is key. And
that raises a good point about how embedded finance is regulated, that it's at least in the US, which is what I'm most familiar with, it's really the bank regulators who are regulating and supervising the bank, and ultimately they're supervising the program through the bank. And then the other partners in the program are indirectly supervised, which can create a lot of complexities there. Do you feel that regulators are trying hard to give that regulatory scrutiny?
You know, I think that
certainty,
I think that this is such a, you know, I think this is just a new and evolving industry, you know, and when you have use cases like buy now, pay later, earned wage access, we've got the cross-border components over here. I've got platforms that are working in Latin America where we're doing a lot of cross-border movement and stuff, facilitating, you know, funds on behalf of foreign end users. And I think relative to all these different types of verticals, you know, education really is key with the regulators, so that number one, they understand the technology, they understand the due diligence process of the banks. You know, what are the flow down provisions that we are requiring of our partnerships, and then how is the bank ultimately monitoring that? And I know compliance sometimes, anytime you're working with a bank, you get all kinds of groans from the platforms. I get that. But at the end of the day, if we set the compliance components up correctly, you know, months down the road when you guys actually are live and you actually have launched the products, we're going to be set in a good position for your success, you know. So that's kind of the way that we think about it.
I'm reminded, you know, just I'll share a joke. The professor didn't mean it as a joke, but in law school, the professor used to remind us that there's never a situation where the rules are vague or the answer is unclear. There's just situations where nobody knows what that answer is yet. And that's one we're in a lot, where a lot of times the regulators don't know what the answer is yet. It's not so much they're hiding it, they just aren't sure.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think part of the reason why I love my role so much within the bank is that a lot of what we do is actually dig in with the clients, with the platforms, and solve for a lot of these issues. So I think it's very stimulating.
One question from the audience is, what are going to be the key differentiators among companies in the cross-border embedded finance space, and what's going to win over providers and customers? Mohit, do you want to take it first?
Yeah, I can go first. I would say that about cross-border, probably about other, not domestic as well, whether it's payments or others, but I'll answer it based on payments and some of the value-added services we do. I believe we've been successful because we've gone really deep into, call it, one part of embedded finance, at least the finance side, that's payments. And we've gone really deep into it and solved it for the clients or the industries we are looking at. So one of my beliefs is any company that's trying to develop an expertise in one of these things is likely to win, because then you do it better than anybody else, right? If you do 10 different things, sometimes the question is, what's your major, right? You do a little bit of 10 things, but what are you really solving for? So going deep into one thing helps. So we've only expanded a little bit, and we've done it based on solving for the ecosystem. So I'll use an example of how we've done it, and I'm obviously biased, but why I think that's the right play here. So let's take, I mentioned the travel use case, maybe I'll use the education use case again. We have students going into institutions and making payments, and we solve for that. There's a set of students that go to educational institutions who work with education counselors, right? These counselors help them prepare for school, get them the visa, and do all of those things, and they help them get into schools. So now we have a solution that's adjacent to what we had before, but it is for these education consultants. We call them agents, right? When they place a student at a school, they also get a commission from the educational institution. We process that payment as well, and we've created this closed loop or solve for this ecosystem where the agent gets the student, we process that payment, we process the commission, we have our own financial arrangement with them. So if you've really solved for the whole ecosystem. It would have been very easy for us to say, let's offer a new financial product to the education institution, and maybe that would be successful, but the key is we are really good at payments, and we said, how do we use that to solve for the entire ecosystem? Where we did expand it was where once we had this new channel of education consultants, and we have this product for Australia-bound students. So when you go to Australia to study, you're mandated to get a certain type of insurance. And if you don't get that, you don't get the visa, you don't get to stay in the country. We have partnerships that enable us to sell that insurance product, right? We call it a marketplace or something on those lines. Now we also have a channel of these education loan consultants. So all we do is make that product available to them, and they're doing the end selling because they have the captive student. Again, it's solving for the ecosystem and being very thoughtful about it. It's so easy to get into the mode of, let's do A, what else can we do? Okay, let's do lending. Okay, let's also offer banking. Let's also offer 10 different things. And if you have the resources and the focus to execute, that's great. But I guess to wrap it, I would say focus and going deeper into a set of financial products versus doing everything for everybody is what I would say is the recipe for success.
Jenny, do you want to take that question? What do you see the key differentiators being?
I do actually agree that the specialization in doing one thing well is really what will set a lot of different companies or different services apart. I think another way that you can try to measure that and understand the success there is how different type, whoever your customer is, your end customer, how they hear about you, right? One of the things that we often see is that the acquisition model for new customers has changed over time. There was a period where lots of marketing dollars were thrown out to acquire new customers, and I think it is an avenue. But what really makes key players and those who tend to win a market stand out is when you actually have customers who recommend the product directly. We still have something close to about 60% of customers who are referring others. And I think those are really signs that your product is meaningful to whoever the end customer is, what their use case is, whatever the job is that they're trying to get done. And the customer actually telling that story more than sort of the outbound activities are really what create that exceptional space and represent the product as doing very well. So that's a way that you can kind of see that you're on that track and sort of winning that space as a measurable tool.
And Kristen, there's a lot of banks that want to get involved in embedded finance. They're seeing this as a great opportunity, and Evolve, of course, was one of those banks recently, and they're one of, there's been a lot, not all have been successful in breaking into it. Evolve obviously has. What do you see from the bank perspective? What makes a bank successful in this area?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you absolutely cannot get into this space without being 100% fully committed. I think a lot of players that do get into this space don't quite realize how much actually goes into building out the infrastructure for supporting these types of platforms and this type of technology. We've actually within Evolve, we have several different divisions. So we do have a very traditional side of the bank in conjunction with what we're doing over here on the fintech space within open banking. So relative to that, we've actually duplicated every division of the bank within this whole fintech ecosystem that we have within open banking. So marketing, legal, compliance, BSA, AML teams, operations, implementations, from nuts to bolts, we've actually duplicated because it is so different. It is hard to get here. What I think is very important, and what I think we truly need to consider is for some of these new players that are kind of getting into embedded finance and trying to go at it from the banking perspective, I would say walk before you run. Take your time, develop the processes, really invest in defining what it is that with your approach of really how to go to market. Get really good at doing some of those things before expanding into too many different sectors at once. And then, over time, as you guys are scaling, in a lot of ways, we're still operating like a startup because this was, to be frank, this industry is so new, So you have to constantly redefine your processes and how you're going to support these clients over time as the industry grows, as you get more feedback back from the regulators. You have to have a good relationship with these regulators, and it's going to be a constant evolving process.
So it's interesting. The theme in all those responses was focus. Be focused on what you're good at and know what you're offering, and don't try to be everything to everybody. Which is in many ways, that's embedded finance. That's what it's there for. It's to allow somebody who does want to expand their product offerings or their services to be able to do so, by bringing in somebody who does know that niche type of service. And that's interesting, not necessarily one I would have expected the answer, but it makes perfect sense that is really key to succeeding, is knowing what you do and focusing on it, not trying to grow too fast. So we have a few minutes left. In those few minutes, I want to get to the question of where you see the embedded finance industry technology going. Like, where are we going to be in 10, 20 years? I think everybody here certainly, and I think probably most people at this conference agree that embedded finance is really already profoundly changed banking and financial services, and we've only seen the beginning of it. I think it's going to be, personally, I think it's going to be the biggest thing in my lifetime that I'm ever going to see in financial services and changing how we see it. But how do you see over, say, looking at the longer trajectory, like 5, 10, 20 years, how is it going to continue to transform financial services? What do we have for the future? And it'll be 20 years before anybody can call you out, so say it's wrong, so you're safe predicting whatever you want. Yeah.
I'll take a stab. I think more than a technology, I would love to see our thought process for finance change. So one of the things that a lot of end consumers are asking for, and especially customers, is just control and access, especially in the US, but in other markets. The different connection points, being able to understand and have transparency around why a financial product is available to some customers, why it's priced a certain way, why the disclosures are as such. Often when as finance has gotten more complex, the ability to explain that well to a customer has gotten additionally as more complex. And I think as we're embedding and, as you said, focusing, specializing, I think those things, when they become simpler, when they become easier, when each different service provider is offering something at a level of expertise, it should be easier to explain to a customer as well. And I think, again, that's more of a model than like a technology or a process or anything. But I think that's the thing that I would really hope changes in this process here, is that customers can just have better access to, and in more transparent ways, the different financial products that exist today.
20 years, it's a tough one. Maybe it's easier to answer 5 or 10 years. I was just thinking about what was happening 10 years ago and how things have evolved. My view is the embedded part of the finance, it becomes even more embedded to a point where you probably don't even realize it's finance, right? When you think of a financial service or product, in many cases it's for a purpose, right? When you make a payment, it's for a purpose, right? The payment is not the purpose usually, right? In some cases it could be. Well, in some cases maybe a money transfer is the desire, but when it's a payment, it's for a purpose, whether it's an Uber ride or a Lyft ride or something else. If we think about the times 10, 15 years ago, what banks were doing, they wanted people to open bank accounts, put money in it, lend it out, all of that. And then they said, how do we get this younger generation into the banking world, right? Somebody would say, hey, this is a bank account for young people, this is a bank account for somebody else. But over time you realize all the kids are on Venmo, for example, or Cash App, right? Mm-hmm. And why are they on it? It's the social element, at least of Venmo, right? Who would have thought? It is entirely possible that in the next generation, maybe it's already happening, kids don't even know what bank is because they're interacting with these other companies, whether tech companies or others, who are providing a software and a service with the underlying layer being the banking layer. That is the most important thing, and you can take that to anything, whether you're making a payment or getting a loan, right? If you're getting a mortgage, the purpose is not the mortgage. The purpose is to buy a house. How do you create those experiences where everything else goes, becomes more opaque? And I think that happens more and more. I don't know what that means, whether it is doing everything with your Alexa or Google Home or ChatGPT or whatever it is, but one thing that's obvious is it's with more computing power, more data, faster way to analyze it, and more integrations being built, everything just goes behind the scenes, and you do the things you want to do with the financial piece just being beneath the rails.
I completely agree with both of you on both of these. One of the things that I'd say is that the underlying technology is ultimately good. It's there. It's going to continue to evolve and grow and get better as, ChatGPT, AI, these different components are going to be integrated into it. What I think would be quite interesting is really kind of understanding not to dive into politics or anything there, but from a political landscape, how is that going to affect the regulatory position on these different verticals moving forward, particularly with fintech? And from that perspective, is there going to be a shift of the types of companies that really kind of emerge over the next several years? And I think it's going to be a direct result of a lot of those things. Again, I think the underlying technology is there. I think it's going to continue to grow. I think we're going to see this insurgence of a lot of maybe traditional retail co-brands that are starting to leverage, these types of technologies. So I think that the opportunity there for those in the fintech space that are doing it right, that are very successful and are producing good revenue right now, I think it's a good opportunity for scale.
Well, the thing I want to have is that sometime in the next 5, 20 years is where I can pay with my car. I can do my tolls. So the technology exists, but I still, when I go through a drive-through or when I park in a parking garage, I have to go pull the ticket out and I have to put the card in. That's one I don't understand why the embedded finance hasn't just delivered on that, so I don't have to pull my card out. And it's not just the inconvenience. That's where I lose my card. Every time I've lost my card over the last X many years, it's because I used it in a drive-through and I didn't put it back in my wallet.
I think the adoption there is with the companies that control that, at that level. So it's got to make its way down, for mass adoption. But
Yep.
It's coming.
Excellent. Glad to hear it. Well, we have just have a few seconds. Or no, actually, I think we're over time. So thank you very much to our panelists, and thank you.
Thank you all.